You stand in the middle of a palace made of mirrors. Every wall reflects gold, every corner gleams with light not from the sun, but from one man. He walks before you. His body does not move like yours, he glides, as though the floor parts beneath his feet. His skin is powdered marble, untouched by age. His eyes do not meet yours, because they have never needed to. He is the center. You are a shadow. The scent of rosewater follows him. Musicians stop mid-note to bow. Courtiers freeze like statues. The hall doesn't just go quiet, it obeys. Even silence here knows its place. You're in Versailles, the crown of an empire built on ritual, obsession, and fear. And at its core, he stands. A man wrapped in gold, believing he was born not of woman, but of flame. Louis XIV. The Sun King. He doesn't smile. He doesn't blink. He simply is. His presence commands belief, like a god demanding worship not through miracles, but through design. The room is his theater. The world, his audience. But lean closer. Too close. There, just beneath the perfume and silk, something else lingers. A scent not meant for royalty. Sour. Sweet. Rotting. You recoil. You weren't supposed to notice it. No one was. The courtiers pretend not to breathe when they bow. The servants hold their hands to their faces when they pass. But you smelled it. Because he's rotting. Still alive, still ruling. But rotting. His leg, beneath those white stockings, festers like meat left out in the sun. The flesh is blackening. And the man who demanded the world bow to him is now battling something he cannot conquer, time. You've never seen a god die before. But today, you will. And he won't go quietly. He will smile through the agony. He will command while bleeding. He will insist on being seen, even as his own skin curls away from the bone. Because to Louis, death is not real. Only theater. But death does not care for theater. You're watching the death of a god unravel piece by piece. If you can sit through this unraveling, the least you can do is subscribe to Tale of History. Or explain yourself in the comments. Why won't you? The man who rotted like a corpse was once a trembling boy in a collapsing world. You're no longer in Versailles. You're in a city trembling beneath fists and flames. The year is 1648. Paris is not dressed in gold, it is armored in fear. You stand in the shadow of the Louvre, but this is not the palace of grandeur. This is the palace of siege. The child King Louis, just 10 years old, lies awake in a velvet bed, not in comfort, but in terror. Outside, the people scream his name, not in praise, but in revolt. The Fronde. A rebellion not of peasants, but of nobles and judges and former allies, all clawing at the monarchy like dogs at a bleeding wound. They surround the palace. They break windows. They chant for blood. The monarchy, his birthright, is mocked, spat on, trampled in the mud. He is a child. But he will remember. He will remember the day they forced their way into his chamber and demanded to see his sleeping face, just to prove to the mob that the king still existed. He will remember the silence of his mother as she held her breath in the dark. He will remember the hunger, the shame, the insult of being treated not like a god, but like a pawn. That night didn't just break his innocence. It planted something deep within him. A cold seed. From that moment forward, Louis vowed never to be humiliated again. Never to beg. Never to run. Never to sleep in fear. If the people would not obey out of love, they would obey out of awe. He would not just be king. He would be untouchable. And so he began to build himself. Brick by brick, ritual by ritual, he reshaped the throne of France into a golden altar. He turned monarchy into spectacle. Law into performance. Rule into religion. He declared himself the Sun King, not a metaphor, but a new identity. The sun gives life. The sun burns. The sun is always above. He summoned his court not to govern, but to orbit him. He dictated when they could eat, where they could walk, how they could breathe in his presence. Every bow, every gesture, every word rehearsed, repeated, performed, not for function, but for domination. Even his waking was theater. For times a day, he was woken and put to bed by a chain of nobles desperate to kiss his sleeve. At dawn, they whispered prayers as they held his slippers. At night, they fought for the privilege of drawing his curtains. He didn't need to imprison his rivals. He invited them into a golden cage and let their vanity keep them there. He ruled not just with armies or laws, but with mirrors, perfumes, fountains, and fear. To defy him was not to defy a man. It was to defy the sun. And yet, beneath the jewels and rituals, the boy was still there. The frightened child who had seen how quickly power could be stripped. And so he clung to control like a drowning man clings to driftwood. Every decree, every tax, every exile, another stone laid to keep the memory of humiliation buried. You've just seen how one man turned trauma into tyranny. If you've learned something new, why scroll past this without subscribing? Let us know in the comments, what exactly are you waiting for? The Palace of Versailles does not welcome you. It consumes you. You arrive through gates gilded in sunbeams, flanked by statues of gods, kissed by winds perfumed with orange blossoms and rot. At first, it overwhelms, the endless rows of columns, the marble fountains, the chandeliers dripping like frozen tears from heaven itself. But soon, you realize, everything here has a purpose. And none of it is beauty. You are not a guest. You are prey. Versailles was never meant to shelter. It was meant to suffocate. Every inch of its architecture bends to one man's will. The hallways bend toward him. The gardens bloom for him. Even time ticks to his rhythm, announced not by clocks, but by ceremony. Louis does not walk through the palace. He orchestrates it. At the center, the Hall of Mirrors, his shrine of self-reflection. Here, he is both monarch and myth. Every day, his life unfolds like an opera with no intermission. At dawn, the ritual begins. Not in silence, but in performance. Le Lever. The royal rising. Nobles gather, dozens of them, to watch him wake. Some hold his shirt. Some offer his shoes. Others merely stand, praying to be noticed. Their rank determines how close they may stand to his bed. But no one speaks unless spoken to. The king opens his eyes, and so begins the day, for France. Then the dance begins. Through long, winding halls, Louis floats from ritual to ritual. He eats beneath gilded ceilings as musicians play carefully chosen notes. He strolls through sculpted groves while nobles walk precisely 2 paces behind. He dines as eyes watch, and speaks in short, sharpened phrases, each word a dagger, each pause a judgment. There is no privacy in Versailles. Not for Louis. Not for anyone. But the court does not resist. They compete. They starve for scraps of attention, spending fortunes on embroidery, lace, powdered wigs that stretch like towers, makeup that poisons them slowly with lead and mercury. Why? Because the closer you are to the Sun King, the less likely you are to freeze in his shadow. And Louis keeps his enemies very close. He calls it court. But it is a prison of pleasure. You are flattered into obedience. Decorated into silence. The nobility who once raised armies now raise champagne glasses. The generals who once claimed land now claim dance partners. All ambition is drowned in wine and etiquette. He has replaced rebellion with gossip, politics with perfume, danger with etiquette. Louis is not just king. He is choreographer. Director. Lead actor. And you are an extra in his masterpiece. But look closer. Behind the mirrors, behind the curtains, something stirs. Letters vanish before they reach their recipients. Whispered conversations are repeated, word for word, by men who should not have heard them. Servants don't serve, they listen. Surveillance doesn't wear chains here. It wears silk. Louis sees everything. And what he sees, he controls. Versailles was not built to protect him. It was built to isolate him. To imprison you within its glittering walls. A world where no one leaves without being changed, where the truth is polished, hidden, drowned in chandeliers. The palace is gold. But its breath is poison. Versailles is not a home. It is a theater of loyalty built atop the bones of fear. A stage where every player smiles while suffocating. And the director? He never forgets his lines. He never misses a cue. But no performance can last forever. The audience claps. But behind the applause, something dark begins to swell. Something, festering. Something he can't control. Not even here. Not even now. Not even Louis. There is no cure for a kingdom built on mirrors. Because sooner or later, they all crack. The mirrors at Versailles lied. They always did. They showed you a man of perfect symmetry. Unwrinkled. Untouched. A marble statue come to life, immortal, invincible. His portraits captured a king who never aged, never suffered, never bled. Eyes sharp. Lips calm. Shoulders squared like an emperor carved in stone. But stone does not rot. And Louis did. Step behind the canvas, and the illusion collapses. The Sun King was sick. He had always been sick. His body, despite the divine image, was a battlefield, quietly devoured from the inside. The truth was not in the paintings, but in the records no one was meant to read. The private notes of physicians, the hidden journals of attendants, the whispered testimonies of those forced to dress his wounds. Louis suffered from dental infection so severe that pus leaked from his gums. His mouth reeked of decay. He lost so many teeth that he struggled to chew, often swallowing food whole. His breath, behind perfumed oils and elegant speech, was putrid, sour with infection. He endured abscesses, oozing boils lanced open with crude knives. He suffered chronic digestive issues, plagued by constipation so severe he sometimes went weeks without passing anything at all. He groaned behind closed doors, hunched over gilded chamber pots while courtiers waited outside, pretending not to hear. He underwent more than 30 surgeries in his lifetime, every one without anesthesia. No gas. No morphine. Only wine, grit, and silence. He never screamed. Not once. He believed pain was weakness made visible. And weakness had no place on a throne. So he trained himself to endure. He sat still while knives sliced his flesh. He smiled while hot irons burned his skin closed. He joked through bleeding. He signed decrees while doctors drained fluids from swollen limbs. But the body remembers what the ego denies. And by 1715, it was remembering everything. It began with a sore. Small. Harmless. At least, that's what they told him. A spot just above his right knee. Tender to the touch. Red, slightly swollen. But it didn't fade. It deepened. Darkened. Hardened. Became hot. Became sharp. Became wrong. Doctors were summoned. They whispered in Latin, fumbled with linen, applied mustard plasters and poultices of dung and vinegar. The smell grew worse. The skin around the sore turned purple. Then black. They called it an ulcer. They did not call it what it truly was. The beginning of decay. Louis refused to admit fear. He still held audiences. Still walked, limping, but upright. Still delivered proclamations, though the pain forced sweat down his powdered face. The court was instructed to say nothing. No one was to speak of the wound. No one was to breathe near it. But even behind layers of silk and perfume, the stench crept in. His body was turning against him, cell by cell. Yet the myth persisted. The portraits kept coming, his face airbrushed with oil and light. His robes untouched by shadow. A king who never changed. A sun that never set. But stars that shine the brightest often burn from within. He smiled through surgeries. You can subscribe through discomfort. Or scroll past and pretend you didn't just watch a man bleed for power. But if you won't subscribe, at least explain yourself in the comments. August 1715. Versailles holds its breath. The air is thick, not with summer, but with silence. The kind of silence that hangs just before a scream. Behind the gold-trimmed doors of the royal chambers, the Sun King lies back in his velvet chair, leg elevated, eyes unblinking. He is still issuing orders. Still signing documents with a steady hand. Still pretending nothing is wrong. But beneath the silk, the sore has changed. It is no longer a blemish. No longer an ulcer. It is something else. Something hungry. It spreads quickly, eating through skin, crawling across muscle like fire through dry leaves. The wound leaks. Then hardens. Then splits open again. The flesh blackens. It no longer bleeds, it weeps a foul, syrupy liquid that clings to the sheets. The king's physicians, blind with pride and drenched in fear, respond with the only tools they know. They bleed him. They apply poultices made of cow dung and sour wine. They wrap the leg in herbs and cloth, then unwrap it hours later to discover skin stuck to the linen, peeling away like fruit left in the sun. Each attempt to heal only feeds the rot. The pain grows unbearable. But Louis does not scream. He tightens his jaw. He tightens his grip. He does not ask for mercy. Instead, he governs. Every morning, he rises. Dresses. Performs his rituals. He limps through the hall of mirrors, pretending not to notice the way courtiers step back. He holds court in stifling rooms, where no one dares open a window, not for fear of draught, but for fear the stench might drift farther. And yet, it escapes. The royal smell. A scent so unnatural, so vile, it seems alive. Not sour. Not musty. But something worse. A blend of death and sweetness. Like perfume on a corpse. A room gone sour. A secret that's been festering for too long. Servants whisper of it. Some faint. Some refuse to enter his room altogether. Even loyal attendants, those who once dreamed of touching the king's sleeve, now hold scented handkerchiefs over their faces. Some weep as they bow. Not from grief. But from the rot. And still, Louis rules. He signs decrees with the hand of a man who refuses to die. He gives speeches with the voice of a man whose leg is already dead. The rot has moved beyond the skin now. It crawls toward the hip, chewing through veins and tendons. The limb is useless. A limb in name only. A black, bloated stump wrapped in lace and denial. Gangrene. The word is finally spoken, softly, in Latin, in corners where the king cannot hear. To amputate would mean admitting defeat. Admitting weakness. Admitting mortality. Louis would rather die. So he does not stop. He smiles for portraits. He walks, with help. He demands respect. He insists that the court continue as usual. The music plays. The perfume fountains flow. The nobles laugh, too loudly, too nervously. But beneath it all, they see it. He is a walking corpse. A dead man in motion. The performance continues, but the actor is hollowing out. He has become what he feared most. Not forgotten. Not overthrown. But pitted. And still, he refuses to fall. There is something almost holy in that defiance. Something terrifying. A man who would rather rot alive in his own throne than loosen his grip on power. A man who bleeds loyalty not because he deserves it, but because no one dares look away. And neither should you. Because if a king can rule from the grave, then you can subscribe before the credits. He ruled while decaying. You can click while breathing. If you won't, then leave a comment and explain why not. Because silence stinks. You stand in the hall of mirrors once more, but the light has changed. The chandeliers still burn. The marble still shines. But the reflection staring back at you is no longer immortal. It is bloated. It is sweating. It is dying. Yet it sits taller than ever. Louis XIV, the Sun King, rules not from strength, but from stubbornness, a man who will not die on his back, but on his feet, rotting with dignity. He insists on holding court. Twice a day, the doors open, and the nobles file in like actors summoned to a dress rehearsal. They bow deeper. Their wigs are whiter. Their perfumes, stronger, because they must be. The stench can no longer be ignored. It seeps beneath doorways, clings to tapestries, poisons the air. Still, they come. They raise handkerchiefs to their faces, painted in oils and laced with lavender. They speak only when spoken to, fearful that a single misplaced word might bring the wrath of a dying man who still believes he is divine. The smell is unbearable. But the silence is worse. Because silence means acknowledgement. Silence means they see him. Not as the sun, but as the flesh behind the flame. Still, he speaks. Long, winding speeches, crafted from memory and pride, delivered in a voice that trembles but does not break. Words filled with grandeur, declarations of legacy, veiled warnings to his enemies and veiled blessings to his heir. Every syllable a refusal. A refusal to surrender. A refusal to step down. A refusal to be anything other than the king. His leg now barely clings to the bone. Beneath the stockings, the black has turned to green. His physicians argue in whispers, should they cut it off? But he answers with silence. To amputate would be to remove part of his authority. And Louis would rather lose the kingdom than lose control. The priests come. They come with crosses and incense, with holy water and soft eyes. They kneel before him, not to bless, but to beg. They urge him to abdicate. To pass the crown. To die with peace, if not dignity. He stares through them. He will not relinquish the throne, even to God. Because what is a king, if not the throne itself? But outside this room, outside these thick, perfumed walls, France is changing. Whispers reach the chapel. Whispers that perhaps this is not sickness. Perhaps this is judgment. That God, after decades of silence, has finally spoken. They say the leg is not infected. They say it is cursed. That it is punishment for a lifetime of vanity. That the Sun King rose too high, and now he burns. Yet the court continues. No one dares speak these thoughts aloud. Not yet. Not until he stops breathing. Because until that moment, he remains the sun. Dimmed. Warped. Decayed. But still burning. He ruled through decay because he feared being forgotten. If you forget to subscribe, maybe history will forget you too. Or leave a comment below if you think subscription should be earned. We dare you. The final curtain did not fall with silence. It fell with a stench so thick it hung in the air like a sentence. 15 days. That's how long it took for the king to die. Not quickly. Not with mercy, but with deliberate decay. A slow unraveling of flesh, of power, of illusion. The leg was gone in all but name. A carcass attached to a man still speaking. The gangrene had won. It climbed beyond the thigh, past the waist, deeper, until it reached his blood, his breath, his brain. His skin no longer held warmth. His sweat no longer smelled human. His eyes, once sharp with pride, now glazed over with a distant gleam, like glass left in frost. He was dying, but not fast enough. The doctors returned daily, helpless and humiliated. They offered comfort, but none could look directly at the wound. Even the most loyal physicians turned pale in his presence. One fainted. Another vomited into his own sleeve. The odor, no longer merely foul, became unbearable. It clung to the walls, soaked into the curtains, curled through the vents. The smell of rot, thickened with opulence. Flesh and roses. Pus and incense. Death, and denial. The servants drenched the rooms in perfume. Not for him, but for themselves. The walls were scrubbed with vinegar and lavender. Buckets of scented oils were poured over rugs. Candles burned night and day, desperate to veil what could no longer be hidden. But you cannot perfume a corpse that still breathes. Still, the rituals continued. Louis did not allow the theater to end. He issued commands from his deathbed, voice thin but resolute. He met with his heir, his great-grandson, a child, pulled close to whisper lessons learned far too late. He told him to avoid excess. To rule with humility. To remember that kings are mortal, even if they pretend otherwise. But Versailles had already heard too much. Too many lies. Too much applause. The boy would forget. France would forget. The mirrors would once again lie. On the morning of September 1st, 1715, Louis took his final breath. And with it came the stench. Eyewitnesses said the moment he died, the odor intensified, filled the room as though his soul had ruptured with his organs. Some said it was symbolic. Others called it divine judgment. But no one stayed long enough to find meaning. The court, once desperate for his attention, now fled from the body. Doors were sealed. Windows were opened. Drapes burned. The room where he ruled, where he rotted, became a tomb drenched in oil and shame. And outside? The sun still rose. The garden still bloomed. The fountain still danced for no one. Because the kingdom was never built to mourn him. Only to survive him. He spent 15 days teaching the world how a god dies. Now spend 5 seconds proving you were watching. Know in the comments why. Because memory, like flesh, doesn't last forever. The king was dead, but the rot remained. They tried to preserve him. They failed. His body, already bloated with death, could not be held together by ritual. The embalmers, men trained to cheat time, found themselves at war with a corpse that had already surrendered. The flesh collapsed beneath their knives. The internal organs had liquefied. The stench, thick and relentless, overpowered even the apothecaries. The royal surgeons whispered that his body was decomposing faster than any they had ever seen. Still, they dressed him in gold. Still, they painted his face. Still, they placed him in a casket designed not to hold a corpse, but a myth. But myths do not leak. By the time they carried him through the palace gates, the smell had become unbearable. Nobles turned away, choking behind perfumed gloves. Guards marched in silence, their eyes wet, not with grief, but with nausea. Some said birds fell from the trees as his coffin passed. Some said the flowers wilted. What should have been a funeral became an escape. The ceremony was rushed. The tributes, brief. The praise, muted. The kingdom he left behind did not know how to mourn him. France stood divided. Some wept openly. For the king they had grown up with. For the man who had turned France into the center of the world. For the sun that had lit their path for more than 70 years. But others? They whispered with bitter smiles. They remembered the taxes. The endless wars. The hunger. The pride. The silence they were forced to keep for decades. And now. They spoke. They called him a tyrant wrapped in velvet. A dictator who ruled through performance. A man who demanded worship but gave only control. A monarch who believed himself eternal, and died with his leg rotting in his sheets. The myth had cracked. The mask had peeled. What remained was not a god. Not even a king. Just a man. Alone. Dying in a palace too large to save him. And yet, his shadow remained. Versailles still stood. The rituals continued. His heirs wore his crown. They walked his halls. They spoke his words. But they could never become him. Because Louis XIV had not just ruled France. He had become France. And now, without him, the question hung in the air like smoke: was he a genius of power? Or a madman who mistook mirrors for truth? A master of illusion? Or the illusion itself? History still argues. But you? You were just shown the truth, unvarnished, unperfumed, and rotting. If Tale of History made you see what the textbooks won't, then subscribe now. Or crawl into the comments and confess why you won't. Because silence, like legacy, eventually collapses. A man who played God, reduced to scent and silence. That is how it ends. Not with thunder. Not with light. But with the slow, invisible disintegration of myth. A body that once walked like eternity now lies still, swollen, soured, forgotten by the very walls that once echoed his name. Louis XIV did not just fear death. He feared being ordinary. So he made himself a symbol. Burned himself into paintings, rituals, architecture, into the very heartbeat of a nation. He became the sun. Not for warmth. But for distance. For the unreachable power it promised. But even the sun sets. Even the brightest fire consumes its fuel. Even kings, soaked in perfume and praise, are still men wrapped in skin. Still cells and blood and breath, finite things, no matter how loudly they command the infinite. And when the rot came for him, it did not kneel. It did not flatter. It did not hesitate. It crept through his bones without fear. Ate through the performance. Exposed what the mirrors had hidden all along: he was just a man. No divine right. No sacred blood. Just a boy who once feared the dark and spent a lifetime building a palace to keep it out. And yet, the dark came anyway. We watch history and call it grand. But how many thrones were just stages? How many legacies, just masks? How many gods, just men too proud to die quietly? Even now, centuries later, we still chase his illusion. We build brands instead of legacies. We curate images, desperate to be remembered. We craft empires of pixels and pretend they will last. We fear being forgotten. Just as he did. But what do we really fear? Is it death? Or is it the silence that follows? And if decay is inevitable, if the flesh falls, if the scent betrays, if the sun sets every night no matter how hard it burns, was his performance worth it? He ruled longer than any monarch in history, yet couldn't rule his own flesh. If Tale of History gave you even a glimpse into that paradox, don't walk away without subscribing. And if you do walk away, go to the comments. Defend your silence. Because even silence, eventually rots.